Hello everybody, welcome back to the 99 ATAR Blueprint. So today I'm going to be talking about 5 things I wish I knew before starting math methods and specialist ATAR. So I'm going to jump right into it. Number 1, foundations. So a lot of topics in methods and spec lead into the next topic. So you can't understand one topic without understanding the previous one. And that was an issue for me because, for example, in methods, you do binomial distributions, which is like probability. Semester 1, year 12 methods, I'm doing binomial distributions and I kind of skip the wordy questions because they're just so much effort. And I just do the math questions. So I get the math, which means I can do it by rote. But I don't really understand it, but I get the math, so it's fine, right? Fast forward to the exam, semester 1. The calculated assumed section had like 80% heavily worded binomial distribution questions, and I did so poorly in that exam because I didn't fully understand binomial distributions. So after that exam, I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go over this again. So I went over it again for like 3 days. I went over the writing before the chapter starts so I could fully understand binomial distributions. And finally, when I did, it all clicked, and I'm like, wait a second, I understand it. Which is good because next was continuous distributions, and I would not have understood that if I didn't understand binomial distributions. So then in semester 2 exam, because there was a lot of probability, but I finally understood it, I did really, really well. So that's what happens when you don't understand one chapter. You're probably not going to understand the next chapter. Same with spec. So if you don't understand like year 10 parabolas, or you don't fully understand functions, which you're going to go through, they make it more complicated. So you're probably not going to understand functions again because the work becomes more complicated. Yes, it's manageable, but you still need to understand your basics, your 3 forms of a parabola. You know that, but you have to get your foundations right. So that leads me into my next tip, which is silly mistakes. We have all made them, we've all lost marks on silly mistakes, but for myself, I've probably lost 5 to 10 marks on average a methods test due to silly mistakes. Now, they're really hard to avoid, but what you need to do is to underline, which you've probably heard a lot, but to get in the habit of underlining every question, whether it's an exercise, a practice exam, a practice test. Do it so that when you get to the exam, your brain's just on autopilot. You know you're underlining all these things. It can be units. They'll trick you so often, especially with methods, with units, minutes, kilometers, meters. What else? Decimal places, 5 decimal places, 3 decimal places, and you get your test back, and it's so frustrating to look at your test, and then you're like, oh my god, well, I got that wrong, and I could have gotten it right. And that is also a really frustrating thing because you dwell on your test mistakes. Dwelling on your test mistakes is what everybody does, and it makes a good grade feel bad. Call me crazy, but if you get an 80% in methods, you made like 4 silly mistakes, you feel worse about it than if you did your very best in methods and got 70%. It just feels so bad, and you have nightmares about it. I'm not gonna get into it, but you know what I mean. Silly mistakes suck, but do things like underlining, making that just natural so you don't skip those really important parts of the question. Number 3, class pad. Know how to use your class pad. I cannot stress this enough when it comes to both methods and specialist. When you're graphing functions, using statistics, sequences in year 11 methods ATAR, using your scales on your graphs. So many classmates have said, oh my god, I didn't know that function existed. I could have spent so much less time on that in the exam. And that's true. Like, I once had a classmate who, well, he's such a smart guy, but he couldn't use his class pad in year 11, and he didn't learn to. So in a calculator assumed section of a methods test, he had to solve this quadratic function. And you could do it on your class pad, but he solved it in his head, and he took the whole page of working out. And it wastes so much time, and you could have spent it on other questions, all that time that you spend where you could have saved time with your class pad, like the solve function even. That is, I've used that so many. Use your solve function, the solve function in your class pad. That saves so much time in exams. And I think I use that on average like once every 3 questions. Next, controversial, going ahead with the course. Now, a lot of people may say it helps, and it might, but for me, going ahead with the course never really helped much because I think that I was all set, but listening to your teacher when you're first introduced to a topic makes it so much easier to understand. Well, usually, if you have a good teacher, which I did, but going ahead with the course can be a waste of time sometimes because sometimes you think that going ahead with the course will automatically make you ahead of other people and might make you smarter, but when they catch up to you and they understand it better than you, it doesn't really make a big difference. Unless there was this one guy in my class who he had so many extracurriculars, so he had to work ahead so that he didn't fall behind in math, and that's totally fine. But if you have the time, I would really recommend you to slow down and just chill out because it's harder to go ahead with the course and understand what you're doing than to just listen to the teacher and go ahead with the rest of the class. Again, it doesn't make you any better to go ahead. Number 5, exam questions as consolidation. I'm sure we've all heard of multiple textbook brands, and it's good to do questions from the textbook. But in your test, you're always going to have 1 or 2 exam questions, and that is when you have to turn to past exams as consolidation. Not past tests are great, but they're not going to prepare you for the exam type questions that you're going to get, which are actually going to challenge you in the test. So use exam questions as consolidation to make sure you really understand topics. Especially with OT Lee, with a lot of my classmates, it did help, but OT Lee can't really replace exam questions. Yeah. So in conclusion, methods is not a hard subject. Methods is challenging conceptually sometimes to really understand the application, but when you do, methods is actually going to be one of your easiest subjects because some people hear methods and they're automatically like, wow, second hardest math must be really difficult. But it's not. And especially specialist kids, they usually find methods easier because they consider it their less hard math. So it's kind of down to psychology sometimes, but obviously it's not all psychology. Sometimes method is genuinely hard. But you got this, and thank you so much for listening. Leave a review, follow, feedback. Love that stuff. Okay, bye.